The Chiefs have become really kind of an interesting team because offensively they're not very good right now. Do you remember a few years ago when Mahomes went through that stage where he was not really a comfortable player and he was leaving the pocket early, and Andy Reid really worked with him to get him back on track and to play more rhythmically? I think Mahomes is in that stage right now.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday. That means class is in session with my guy, Professor Greg Cosell from NFL Films University. Also means we have a game tonight. Pretty good one. NFC South, Falcons, Bucks. Looking forward to talking about that, giving you my pick a little bit later in the show. It also means tomorrow already we'll have winners. Those of you that engage in any way with @RossTuckerPod on any platform. I would say in particular a comment or a reply or a quote post. I love giving out winners. I love sending stuff to you guys. Hopefully you appreciate it. We'll have a sponsor confirmation email winner as well. That's someone that takes advantage of any of our sponsors. Maybe it's westshoreHome.com/Ross or Future Fans, giving away a Madden code to someone that takes advantage of one of those two. And then the YouTube shout out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. You make a comment and subscribe, I'll send you a video, personalized video, if you're the winner each week. Other than that, let's dive right into it. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, my guy Greg Cosell is, of course, presented by Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka. Please drink responsibly. Greg, let's start with tonight's game. It's the Bucks and the Falcons. Boy, oh boy, the Bucks looked pretty darn impressive. Baker and the boys against the Eagles. They take on Atlanta in Atlanta tonight. Greg, what are you looking for here? What have you seen from these teams?
I'll tell you, let's talk Bucks, Ross, because to me, watching the Bucks versus the Eagles really spoke to kind of a larger point about the league. What the Bucks did in that game is, and this is the way you have to play with Baker anyway, but everything was quick game, quick rhythm, hit his back foot, ball comes out. And the reason I make this point, obviously every coach would like the quarterback to play with timing and rhythm, but the Eagles are a structurally cover 4 defense where they kind of play 4 across on the back end and they don't really press. So what happens is if your quarterback is going to hit his back foot and deliver the ball, whether it's 3-step drop timing or 5-step drop timing, your pass rush is not going to get there. So how do you disrupt the pass game? You have to disrupt it by disrupting the routes and the receivers. And if you're going to play that 4 across coverage as a starting point where there's no press involved, then the receivers basically have free access into routes and the timing of the pass game is not disrupted. And that allowed Baker right from the start to get into a rhythm. The Bucks are a heavy, reduced split team with wide receivers, which does limit the ability to press. They're a heavy motion team because Liam Cohen is now their offensive coordinator, whose background is with the Rams and Sean McVay. So it was kind of the perfect marriage in that game. We'll see what the Falcons do this evening to try to change that. But that's the way the Bucks want to play with their pass game. And when they're in many ways allowed to do it, they look really efficient.
Greg, I know the answer to this, but anytime I hear you say something that I think there's probably a decent amount of our listeners that won't know, reduced splits, explain reduced splits and why you can't press reduced splits.
Reduced splits, you hear different terms, reduced splits, cut splits, minus splits. It's when the receivers, wide receivers, line up tighter to the formation, closer, let's say, to an attached tight end or closer to an offensive tackle. So when they're that close to the formation, they essentially have a two-way go with route concepts. It's tougher to press those guys because now corners have to come way inside. And don't forget, most outside corners, we're not talking slot corners now, we're talking outside corners. They're used to having the sideline as kind of part of how they play. And then when they have to move very much inside, they're not used to that. So what almost always happens is that they play with more depth and width because they need to give space. So it becomes much easier for receivers to get free access into their routes.
Got it. Love it. That makes sense. I mean, the way you describe it, Greg, it's like, why don't more teams do that?
Well, more and more teams are doing it. That's the thing. You're seeing it more and more. Just because, like I said, you want free access into routes. You want it to time up with your quarterback's drops, especially with the increase in quick game, 3-step, 5-step drop timing throws. All that has to sync up. Quarterback's drops have to always sync up with receivers' routes.
All right, let's keep it moving, and we'll get to Sunday morning's game, which is a good one across the pond in Tottenham. It is the Jets, and the Vikings still aren't slowing down yet, Greg. They're still going. Vikings, Jets. What jumps out to you about this matchup?
Yeah, obviously everybody's focused on Sam Darnold, as they should be. He's playing very good football. And we've talked about the Vikings defense. That's what really fascinates me. I know they gave up yards last week, and so that, their ranking might not be great, but they are a really difficult defense to play against. And last week, the Jets' offensive line really struggled against the Broncos. Fashanu, the rookie from Penn State, played right tackle. He had a tough afternoon. Some of the issues that cropped up on his tape in college really showed up. The stiffness in pass protection. He had a difficult time with Jonathan Cooper on the edge. Aaron Rodgers was under duress a good part of the game. The Jets, therefore, were unable to really convert on third downs, where they were very poor. But this Vikings defense, with all their multiple front looks, all their movement, both pre-snap and post-snap, they rush 3, they rush 6. They show a lot of coverage looks and coverage rotations in the secondary. Now, Aaron Rodgers has seen all this. I'm not suggesting that they're going to fool him, but it's just difficult to play against. They don't give you clean looks where you just feel comfortable as you're dropping back. Very often when you're dropping back, you're deciphering. Now, Rodgers is a master at that, but his O-line is going to have to protect better.
It's interesting because they've invested a lot on that offensive line. I mean, to have Fashanu as not even a starter, as like your swing guy, they had to feel pretty good about that coming into the year. The other thing is, it's just interesting because even like talking last week for that Browns-Raiders game with Patrick Graham, and he talked about, what Brian Flores does. It's funny because every defensive coordinator is trying to make the quarterbacks uncomfortable.
Correct.
They're trying to make it hard to decipher. But some of them are just better at it than others. Or some of them are more willing to do unconventional things, I guess, than others.
And it's also the players you have, because, I was saying to one of my guys in the matchup room here at NFL Films watching the Vikings D that with all the things he does, I think to myself, how do you go about teaching all that? The players must be really intelligent, really intuitive. Because, for instance, someone like Metellus, number 44 on the Vikings, who literally plays every snap and was not a high draft choice coming out of Michigan, I don't know if another team would see him the same way as Brian Flores does. I don't know the answer to that. But he is such a multi-dimensional, multi-positional player for them. And, no one will talk about him. He's not going to be an all-pro. He's not, but he plays every snap because they essentially don't play out of what we normally consider a base defense. So he's a combination safety, linebacker. He does everything. He lines up everywhere. So I always think when I watch that defense that these players must be really intuitive because you can't do all these things unless you trust your players to execute them properly.
Let's talk Ravens and Bengals. Greg, the Bengals got their first win in Carolina. Their offense seems like it's humming. And the Ravens ran over the Buffalo Bills Sunday night.
I watched that Ravens offense, and, we just spoke about the Vikings defense being difficult to play against. That Ravens offense is really difficult to play against. There's so much misdirection. There's so much backfield action. And the Lamar factor is so critical. And now they can run downhill. So they can beat you in some ways, and I don't know if this is the right word, but they can beat you in some ways with deception, with all their misdirections and backfield actions, and now they can line up and just grind you downhill. So, one of the things that really stood out watching the tape this week was just sort of the hesitation that all this causes for second-level defenders. The Bills' second-level defenders really had a difficult time, and it just slows down your reactions. You can't trigger. You're waiting to react instead of reacting. And look, the last 2 weeks, Lamar's thrown 15 balls and 18 balls because they've been able to do so much with their run game and the difficulty in stopping their run game, which of course includes Lamar. And he's the only quarterback in the league, in my view anyway, where you can do this with. You can play this way because of Lamar. So it's just a difficult offense. Now, granted, the Bengals, they're in the same division. They've seen him before. But the Bengals have had a difficult time this year with their run defense.
Let me ask you this, Greg. Certain other teams, Eagles with Jalen Hurts, Cardinals with Kyler Murray, maybe the Colts with Anthony Richardson, they're just not as dynamic as Lamar. Like, in other words, aren't there other teams that could try to play like
I
this,
think
like Lamar?
Conceptually, you think they could. I think Lamar is in a different category. I think when it's like when you talk about great quarterbacks, like when you talk about, I remember for years and years after Joe Montana, people would say about college quarterbacks, well, he plays like Joe Montana. Well, you can stylistically look like that, and we all make comparisons like that. But when all's said and done, there was only one Joe Montana who played exactly that way. I think Lamar is in a special category when it comes to that. I think there are teams that try to echo that and do that, and you mentioned those kinds of teams, whether it's a Murray or a Richardson. I think clearly, I think you see the Colts trying to do that. But I think that the one thing about Lamar, too, is he's a better passer than I think. I don't want to say people give him credit for, but he can make throws. It's not a case where he's just a guy who can run. He can make throws. And they've really got a really good blend of how they mix the run and the pass.
Let's talk about Buffalo, Greg. And I'm not just talking about Labatt Blue Lights that are absolutely delicious and help you live life to the power of we with friends and family. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. I'm talking about the Buffalo Bills. The Bills and the Texans. One of the juicier matchups this week, Greg.
Yeah. The Texans offense, of course, is a really difficult one to play against. Stroud is just a natural timing anticipation thrower. He's got great ball location. And Nico Collins, I don't know if you're aware of this, Ross, but he's got more than 100 yards receiving than any receiver in the league. I mean, he runs these in-breaking routes. That's a foundation of what they do. And Stroud is so good as a window thrower. I'm not sure you can teach that. You can teach guys to be so precise with their timing and anticipation and ball location in those tight windows versus zone coverage. But that's where Collins does a lot of his work. They're a difficult pass game to play against. The concern for them is their run game has not been very good, and their O-line has struggled a bit this year. Stroud's been under a little more duress this year than he was a year ago. But the Bills, look, the Bills are not a bad team just because of what happened on Sunday night. I think that they're working through their pass game in terms of the intermediate level in their pass game. They're trying to figure out which receivers can really do that effectively. They obviously want Coleman to develop. Coleman caught 2 back shoulder throws last week against the Ravens, but they're trying to figure out, I think, and I'm just going by watching the tape, what their intermediate pass game can look like. Because everything has been incredibly rhythmic, which is good. But obviously, if you're ahead, that's fine. When you get behind, you have to throw the ball a little more down the field. And I think that's something that they're progressing toward, and we'll see what happens. This is a good ball game and a tough matchup.
Yeah, huge. Looking forward to it. Curious about both these teams. I got to see the Browns up close and personal on Sunday. Now they play the Commanders. I was not expecting the Commanders to dominate the Arizona Cardinals the way in which they did, but they did.
And
So
I'll
let's
tell you
talk
one thing I want
Browns
to
and Commanders, Greg.
look. We'll talk about all season. We'll talk about Jaden Daniels. Okay, he's playing obviously very, very well. I think Cliff Kingsbury is doing a masterful job because one of the things you notice is by NFL standards, the relatively easy throws that they present to him, and that's what coaching should do. But the player I really want to talk about, because I think he's overlooked because of Daniels, and deservedly so, Daniels has been special, is Brian Robinson. They've got a meaningful run game, and Robinson is a strong, physical inside back. He's a downhill runner. He's a finisher. He gets hard yards, and I think that that's a really important part of their offense. Now, having said that, I'm not sitting here saying Robinson is, one of the top 3 backs in the league. But in some ways, and they don't have another back like Jahmyr Gibbs, but in some ways, Robinson and David Montgomery are similar style backs. They're physical, they're tough, they're aggressive. They're a little juicier than you think. You wouldn't call them explosive, but they're not plotters, and they're not just grinders. So their run game, I think, is a factor as well. And don't forget, with Daniels, you do always have the zone read element in your offense, so you have to account for that defensively.
That part of it helps quite a bit. On the other side, by the way, I thought Deshaun Watson played really well, and they still lost to the Raiders, which probably not a great sign. What about the Niners and the Cardinals, Greg? The Niners have gotten some of their guys back. We had Ed McCaffrey on yesterday talking about Christian and kind of where he's at. I'm a little disappointed in the Cardinals the last couple of weeks. I thought after they blew out the Rams, that might be more who they were.
Well, I think they're always going to be inconsistent on offense just because of the nature of Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, can make special, dangerous, dynamic plays as he did week 2 against the Rams. And by the way, can do that at any given moment in any game. But there's no real consistency to the way in which he plays. There's not enough routine layups that are made in their pass game. So it becomes week to week. You just don't know what's going to happen. In many ways, you don't know what you're going to get. They actually run the ball very well. James Conner, I just talked about Brian Robinson. You could put James Conner in that same bucket. He's a really tough, aggressive, physical runner. And they have some really good run game concepts. Defensively, I think is where they struggle. I sense that Jonathan Gannon, he does some really interesting things defensively. I won't go in the weeds because you'd almost have to see it. But I think he's trying to scheme for the fact that he doesn't have really impact players on the defensive side of the ball. So he's working to scheme and try to present different looks for offenses to make it difficult for offenses to figure out. But if I told you that Jordan Mason through 4 games has 11 more carries than Christian McCaffrey had through 4 games last year, I bet that would surprise a lot of people.
Yes, it would for sure. And you're right. The Arizona Cardinals, they don't have any pass rushers.
No.
They don't have any. So
No.
I mean, they have to have the worst group of edge rushers maybe I've ever seen for an NFL team. Like those guys, none of them get home on their own. What about? Hey, this is a classic one, Greg. Cowboys, Steelers.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's funny. I always get asked in various places, Ross, about guys and sacks, pass rushers and sacks, because fans often say, oh, he only has such and such number of sacks. What's wrong with him? That is not the right way to evaluate a pass rusher. The right way to evaluate a pass rusher, in my view, is how offenses account for him in those critical situations, high leverage situations, long yardage. And when you watch, whether it's a Nick Bosa, we just talked about the Niners, TJ Watt, who I did a piece on in the matchup show this week, but not just focused on him, but how offenses account for these players. If they have to chip them, if they have to keep someone in, if they have to do something special in order to account for a really good pass rusher, that's the better way to evaluate a pass rusher. You know why? Because that means the offense becomes limited in what they can do in their pass game. That's the way to evaluate pass rushers, not whether on 400 rushes he has 14 sacks or 18 sacks. So I think that's really how you evaluate a pass rusher, is how offenses have to account for them in critical situations.
Interesting. I think there's some truth to that. What about the game I got for Westwood 1 Monday night? I'll be in the booth with Kevin Harlan. Anybody driving around?
My
Saints,
man Kevin Harlan,
Chiefs.
say hello for me.
I will. Yeah, he's the man. Saints, Chiefs, Greg.
The Chiefs have become really kind of an interesting team because offensively they're not very good right now. Do you remember a few years ago when Mahomes went through that stage where he was not really a comfortable player and he was leaving the pocket early, and Andy Reid really worked with him to get him back on track and to play more rhythmically? I think Mahomes is in that stage right now. Now, it could be a function of lack of confidence in his receivers. We don't know what's in his head, so I don't want to say what it is. I can only tell you what the tape shows, that right now there's not really a rhythmic feel to it, to the manner in which he's playing. They're winning by, I think they've had one-score games, and like going back to last year, like 16 of their last 17 games, something like that. But they're not really putting up a lot of points. They're going to have to figure it out on offense without Rice now, of course. Defensively is where they're really good. I really enjoy watching their tape every week. Spagnuolo is the best in the league using his defensive backs as pass rushers and blitzers. I mean, it's really unbelievable how he puts together particular pressure concepts, particularly when you get to third down, and particularly when you get to the fourth quarter. He's so good at that.
Check him out on social media like I do. He is the man at Greg Cosell. Love our conversations every Thursday here on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
Smirnoff knows there's no I in football. Football is a we thing, an experience that is best enjoyed together with good drinks and good folks. Smirnoff's the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. And this year, Smirnoff is giving fans in select areas of the country a chance to win the ultimate game day experience, from tickets to sideline passes and much more. Just head to WeDoGameDays.com until November 15th to enter for your chance to win. Smirnoff, We Do Game Days. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. No purchase necessary. 21 plus. Ends 11/15/24. See rules at website for participating areas and other important details. Sponsored by Diageo Americas Incorporated, New York, New York.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, you really didn't get a comment on this. The suspensions. Bills edge rusher Von Miller, he was suspended 4 games. Browns defensive tackle Mike Hall, 5 games, both under the personal conduct policy.
Right, and both stem from domestic abuse allegations. So I guess for the NFL to suspend them, they think that there's some truth to that, or that they found in their investigation enough evidence that they thought it merited a suspension, which is a really bad look for both those guys. Really bad look. Mike Hall hasn't played yet for the Browns, so it's hard to know what they're missing, although they're missing something on defense because they're not playing the way they did last year, that's for sure. And then Von Miller had really played pretty well so far this year for the Bills. I think he had a sack in his first 3 games, was certainly giving them some really good situational pass rush. So that's a loss for them as well.
We've got a game tonight, Ross. The Atlanta Falcons, they are hosting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Who do you like in this one, and why?
Well, my Thursday night pick is always presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. This is a tough one. I mean, I've gone back and forth on this one. The Falcons are at home. I give them some extra love for that. But I think the Bucs are better. Although the Bucs the last 2 weeks, they were so bad against the Broncos, so good against the Eagles. It's really hard to know what Bucs team we'll get tonight. I guess I'll go with the Bucs, but honestly, it's a coin flip. I'll go with the Bucs just because it feels like they are more firing on all cylinders on offense than the Falcons. It feels like Kirk Cousins still trying to get accustomed to the new offense, and Kyle Pitts and Drake London. So give me the Bucs on the road. I think they're underdogs there. It's my first underdog pick of the week.
Ross's Underdog of the Week.
Got some injury news. Patriots center David Andrews, he's having season-ending shoulder surgery, while Dolphins edge rusher Jalen Phillips, he's also out with a season-ending injury for the 2nd straight year.
That is just brutal. I think last year for Jalen Phillips, it was his Achilles, and then this year it's his knee. I did that game Monday night on radio, and he came back in and batted down a pass, and then came out, and then came back in, and you could just tell like something was wrong with it. It kind of like gave out on him. You could see it at the tail end of a play, and he walked off. And I don't know what the injury is, but rehab is a brutal, long, grueling process that I really wouldn't wish on anyone. And so for Jalen to have to do that 2 years in a row really, really stinks. As for the Patriots, there was some talk yesterday about David Andrews potentially trying to play the rest of the season through this shoulder injury, to which I would have said, why? Why would you do that? You're on a terrible team, and that could affect your offseason and getting ready for next year when they might have a better team. He's definitely, in my mind, making the right decision by getting that shoulder surgery now. But this might delay even longer until we see Drake May as the starter, because now they don't have their veteran center to make sure everybody's on the same page and make sure the blitzes are picked up anymore either.
Cowboys wide receiver Brandon Cooks, he is expected to miss at least one game due to a knee infection following a procedure in New York.
Thought that was interesting, right? So they played last Thursday night in New York. I don't know if Brandon came out of that game or if Brandon had anything wrong with him, or if maybe he just stayed there after the game to get this procedure done. But I mean, whatever procedure he had ended up getting infected. So now he's had to have like his meniscus cleaned out, the infection cleaned out. And so he'll miss at least one game. I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than that. So now you got Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Brandon Cooks, a lot of key guys for the Cowboys. Don't look like they're going to be playing against the Steelers on Sunday. That is not good. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. Automatic smiles for whoever you give it to. They might even cry. That's how much they love these things. It's a personalized newspaper cover story about anyone that's special to you. And then you also get an autograph if you forwarded me the email order, ross@rosstucker.com. I'll send you an autograph in the mail. Backofficescheduler.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.